Good evening na po, mukhang paggabi na. And of course,
Peace be with you.
actually, we know it's been a long afternoon and we would like to thank you for staying on to listen to us. It's not easy to be the last speaker among so many distinguished speakers. I'd like to say there's an advantage and a disadvantage to that. One disadvantage, of course, nasabi na karamihan na gusto mong sabihin. But on the other hand, I see that as an advantage kasi we end up, I think God made it such that in the end, our presentation is going to be some kind of a synthesis, I think, of all the wisdom that we've heard this afternoon. So anyway, don't worry, even though there's two of us, that doesn't mean our presentation will be twice as long. We were told by Timmy to keep it within 18 minutes. So we have 18 frames, and we're going to make sure it's 1 minute per frame. Okay, so I think the way we set it up, I will start out with the first few frames, and then Pilar will come in to talk about Cabriba itself. We complement one another because I like to take the macro perspective. So I'll synthesize a lot of what has been said about what's wrong with Philippine education. That's the outline, actually. And then Pilar will come in with Cabriba's life learning system, and then they'll just come in briefly at the end for some food for thought. So I guess I can get Pilar's seat first so that she doesn't get tired.
Let me confess something. I actually did a PowerPoint with him on a more scholarly way kasi I wanted to impress an economist. And we really are mismatched. I'm a visual spatial person and he's very logical, mathematical. So in the end, what we have is, I would say, why not dance with us for change? Because everyone has contributed to opening the door, so we don't have work to do. But I guess deepening the understanding is going back and throwing to you, who are left behind, something very, very important. And I'll hold that for my time.
Okay, well, you can take your seat for a while, and let me just walk through this synthesis of what everybody has been saying is wrong with Philippine education. And I think I'll have to admit, being an economist myself, siguro this is seen through an economist's eyes, and I guess it shows through in the way I say it. So what's wrong with Philippine education? We've heard it from Mike, we've heard it from all the other speakers. Our education system, to my mind, as an economist, has, number one, it widened the gaps in our society. And it always said that education is supposed to be the great equalizer. But my own sense of it, sadly, is that it has been a gap widener in our society, in particular because we have skewed access to quality education in this country. And second, it's biased for certain intelligences. Second, education is focused on employment rather than job creation, and on incomes rather than wealth creation. And third, it's preoccupied with knowledge and information and may have neglected imparting wisdom. Let me go through that quickly one by one before I lead off to how we do it in the Cabriba Alternative School Foundation. My own perception is that private education, and the data actually tell this, are generally superior and actually cost society less. And how do I know that? When I was at NEDA, we saw some data that showed that the government actually spends more money per pupil in the public school system than what it costs to get a private education. And yet, test results clearly showed that the products of the private educational system were generally they were generally superior to those products of the public education system. Then only the rich can afford the best schools, of course, the best private schools anyway. Unfortunately, there are not too many of public schools which can really be considered the best. No? Actually, I also looked at data and found out that through the years, the budget spent by the government per pupil in the public school system has gone down in real terms. If you correct for inflation, it actually has been going down. So what can you expect? And third and fourth, again, this has been the subject of earlier talks, schools focus too much on the verbal linguistic and the logical mathematic intelligences. And again, I see that these are the intelligences that are easiest for the rich to sharpen. They're the ones who can afford the books. They are the ones who can afford the computers that will sharpen these kinds of intelligences. And those strong in the other intelligences, the musical, the body kinesthetic, and the others, are the ones marginalized in the public school system especially as the bobo or mahina. Now, again, I don't have to go through this because this has been done by Teacher Joy earlier, but again, those are actually 9 na raw ngayon. There's the existentialist intelligence that was also added to the list not too long ago. I was asking Pilar to explain that to me, but I think she can do that. So I need not do this, but I highlighted verbal, linguistic, logical, mathematical, precisely because mukhang yun lang ang tinitingnan ng mga eskwelahan. Now, what about this second flaw? I think our schools tend to prepare our students to work for others after they finish schooling, rather than to create work for others. And that's what leads to this very high unemployment rate. And our country is very unusual in this part of the world for having such a high unemployment rate. We have close to 3 million unemployed Filipinos, by the way, according to the new definition adopted by the government. If you use the old definition, it's closer to 4 to 5 million. And then students are trained and geared towards earning salaries, earning incomes, rather than creating wealth. So again, that leads to low productivity. And we've been lamenting, by the way, again, that compared to our neighbors, our country has lower productivity, both labor and total factor productivity. And then the surveys tell us that the typical student's objective or dream is to work for a multinational company in Makati, or worse, to work overseas. And that's why we have, the last figure I heard now is 3,000 Filipinos leaving every day to work overseas. So what we really need is to educate, to create wealth, to create jobs, not to look for jobs and to look for a salary, look to earn a salary. Entrepreneurship, and we've heard a lot of advocates for this already by now. We believe that from the very beginning, even from kindergarten, you can begin to teach the values of entrepreneurship, and then the skills like accounting and whatever substantive technical skills needed to run an enterprise can start from secondary school up. And mind you, it's not just for management majors. And that's why, again, everybody in whatever field of study should have this entrepreneurial orientation. That, by the way, is one of the philosophies behind Cabriba. That's why I wanted to mention that. And finally, we are too preoccupied with perhaps information and knowledge at the expense of wisdom. Knowledge and information, has already been said by the speakers before us, is very easily accessible in this information age. You don't have to have children having back-breaking bags because all of the information that they need to memorize, they have to bring in and out of school. And of course, now they have these roll-on bags because hindi na kaya ng mga backpack nila. But what for? It's so easy to just put on a smart bro dongle and access that information and knowledge without keeping it in your head. Now, knowledge need not be memorized. What's needed is wisdom, which I'd like to define as the ability to use knowledge to solve problems. Somebody already has said that before. Problems within the family, within the community, within the nation, and of course, problems of humanity in general. And of course, sometimes I feel uncomfortable when there's too much preoccupation with science and math in the discussions on education. But wisdom does not come from science and math alone. It comes also from history, from studying history, culture, humanities, a subject I used to hate, but now I appreciate, now that I've matured more. Philosophy, another subject we like to hate, and civics. This is what gives us, in fact, more of that wisdom than the science and math. So we have to be balanced about this whole thing. So this is where I segue to Pilar, and I think this is where she begins to talk about how Cabriba does things.
You've heard a lot about multiple intelligences. Now, that tells you what is the intelligence that has been endowed to you, at least 2 to 3 per individual. And you could maximize that if you have a team learning process going on for you. But with learning style, what about thinking? What if you think about being a teacher by first knowing how the person learns? We take it uniformly that when we are going to teach and impart knowledge, it is going to input into the brain. But a lot of the processing is already misfired. Because for one, by not knowing how a person learns, you will not get through. And that's why school, education are different from saying learning. So we are looking at basically a model. It's a mental model. And the differences with us right now is the 21st century has a lot of new neuroscience researches that show that the brain and the mind are something that we need to explore if we are to be really good social change agents. And I guess every teacher in us, a parent or anyone, can teach if we know how people learn. So I will not go through this, but I want to get some coffee. But the most critical, and we never knew it. I guess it is late in coming. I could have done better, you know. But the only thing after 20 years of doing multiple intelligences and, you know, institutionalizing it right now is, do you know that learning is triggered by a socio-emotional relationship? It's not the IQ. It is the chemical reaction when the nervous system produces enough in the brain to make a synapse. That means to make it long-lasting, and it's not just about rote memorization. It is something meaningful and significant. And that is why a person with such high learning capacity is able to innovate. So with this one, I will breeze through, because much of the presentation has said that. So if I could be supported here, we are going to talk of the learning system, but I will shortcut that because you're reading it right now, isn't it? Okay? So it is basically a system of learning about life. We have probably decontextualized life and put it into fragments called subjects when they're totally not the end of everything. And so the dynamic learning social process is centered on community life and needs. We may know what is outside, but we may not know what is in our community that brings about the kind of stresses, the kind of ill health, which contributes to poor learning capability. So this is a system, and we talk about the context of learning community. It is about groups of people who share common values and beliefs, engaging ourselves actively in an experience. It is experiential learning. How do we go about that? Cross boundaries. How many here are family members? Okay? See, we all have a stake in the family. From the school, what we did, and we are working with poor children in the squatters. This is what we do as an NGO. We brought it to the real solution, which is the family. So we now have what we call family learning. What does that mean? In every public school that we had about 7 provinces, basically through the support of DepEd and all that. But what we found out in the 7 provinces in our country is, if a parent is able to recognize the multiple intelligences of their children, they are willing to let go of grades. Why? The first thing that they see is, why is my child wanting and excited to go to school? That's a real evidence. And second is, how come they can learn better about the problems of community like flood, garbage, in a way that they produce results. What is the result? Through their process folio, the portfolio system. So when we found out that it is possible in the public school, what we did was to carry it over through the support of Senator Pangilinan, to come up and go directly to college, the first year and second year college, like saying it's 11th, 12th. So we go from the whole early childhood to the basic education, and then see the problem in tertiary because they have been fragmented. And what do we find out? Our children need transition. Transition is their capability to manage the change socio-emotionally. So the problem was they were not ready for college, but they need a transition point where they will see the meaning of what they are going to take and go back to a personal mastery. What does that mean? They're able to reflect. Part of the learning is designing a program for themselves in the community, and then moving on to seeing that the family is going to learn together with them. So kasama sila sa decision making. And then thirdly is to look at the community resources, which I will show you an example, and then move on to career pathing. All four is about change management. So ito po yung, I will go through what is the content. We found out it's not really much of the curriculum. It will never sustain. What we need is to look at how people learn and put in the necessary methodology, which is the bridging. Bridging means you utilize the natural environment. Bakit tayo nagpapakahirap sa science books when nandyan yung coconut tree, yung jatropha, everything is within your resource as long as the teacher and the parents, the family, and the community is open to the learning process, to the change. So, part of that is the structure. It would be very hard to look at patterns and not change the structure. So, from the system, the structure is we try to create as an NGO a mechanism for the local governance. This is where our children were able to participate in policy making. So, the evidence of the community to assess if the children have learned is what solutions do they have for the local community. And so we hold a forum just like this, and we address this to our barangay officials, to every person who matters in the community about decision, and then share their solutions. They may not really be significant solutions, but the fact is, this is the first time that the adult decision makers are hearing from our youth, are hearing from our children that they can make a difference. This is how we look at technology. So we have completed, in fact, she's here. We just completed this 5 years project. We shared this with DepEd, and this is 7 provinces. What we found out is it's hard to sustain when at this point, the greatest fear of educators is, can we break rules? We end up doing it the fastest way. Start within your own. Take courage. Learn differently. But do remember, whatever we do is a stake to the future of our children. So we end up that the importance and the significance of all these learning processes is basically belongs to the family. And the family is not the mere family that we have. It is a community. Because it is where the problems lie, but it is also where we can find our solutions that would be more systemic in nature than anything. So, let me move on. Can we go back to that? This frame. Okay, we live in Los Baños. Very ideal. We have Mount Makiling. It's being deforested. And that's why you have a Laguna Lake that is almost dying. All right? So, the children realized, where is actually the systemic problem? So we found out we have to go to the highest point where there is a community, a squatter community. And they went on interviews, they went on study tour. And for the past 2 weeks, they did a field study of that community. So they have so much endowment like this Dampalit Falls. What happened is, how come there is so much flooding? When you go to Los Baños, you will find out that during rainy days, it's not even heavy, it is flooded already in the highway. So when they met the officials, these are grade schoolers. We start in grade 3 with the problem solving up to high school. And when they found out, they talked to the local officials. And here was DENR saying, well, that's not anymore our area. That's the DPWH. So the children started saying, how can we ever learn from you when you do not give us the whole system? We want to help, but please help us learn by listening to our solution, by coming again on the second forum, and then you assess us of how we learn. Now, the bottom line of all this is, you need not have good classrooms, which is very expensive. What you need are people in the community, especially families, who will begin to trust the dignity of man, the capability of man to be good and to be able to share. I think that's trust. Trust is very, very important. And second is, we learn through experience. It is so it is so catching if you know that your child can be a problem solver at a very early age. Just the point that your child is saying to you, Mama, your hair and your shoe do not match, is already telling you something. But what if your child comes to you reflectively, because this is a practice already of the whole process of learning, and says to you, I don't think you have succeeded in life. Yeah, we may have the richness in this world, but you're always gone. And in the end, what makes us not sustain change or transformation, get to there, is fear and anxiety. The bottom line is, it's still socio-emotional. And research has proven that that is the first thing that our children need. A caring, healthy, inclusive, learning, and developmentally appropriate community. With that, I would like to end and give it back to him. And with his frames. This is the governance. We call it the 4 Fs. So we did a little innovation here. And we are now institutionalizing this because if you look at life, you look at the metaphor of life. For one, all of you have the role of being a member of the family, isn't it? Right? Then all of us are citizens where we can share our thoughts and ideas about good policies, policy decisions, and our choices. Third is, we can all be entrepreneurs and create wealth because we have so much of the learning capability that we need. And fourth is, we can actually see a new culture coming out from us that is our heritage, our resources, and our talent. With that is governance, so we bring this to the local government. How? This is where you call, if we do it, then it is economic in nature. So you're doing already whatever you call math. If you do it in the forum, you're actually doing civica. If you're doing it in the family, you're doing social science, social studies. And if you do it on the fair, it means you are contributing to a new culture of thinking and interaction. That means you're creating wealth. So this is something to explore later, and maybe for academe to do a research on. But the solution is, you can only do that if you allow the children. We have grade 3, grade 4 on apprenticeship already. Very early. Apprenticeship, and by 3rd year and 4th year high school, they go on internship to the institutions. And that is where they can make a difference. Okay? So yun po, apprenticeship, internship was a good way for us. Thank you very much.
So just to wrap it all up, I guess what we're really trying to do in all of what we've said this afternoon is really building the nation's character. I guess there's a lot of lament that we lack that. First of all, building a concern for the common good rather than just self-interest. And how many times have we found ourselves lamenting the fact that Filipinos, too many of those around us, or we ourselves, are too self-centered and not caring enough for the common good. The love of country, the makabayan, we've heard that earlier. And again, some of you may recall that email that circulated from an anonymous Korean who said, the problem with the Filipinos is that they don't love their country. But again, he was comparing, or I don't know if it was he or she, comparing us with them and how Koreans rallied to their government when they had the Asian financial crisis and donated their jewelry and their gold to the government just to shore up the reserves and all that. And of course, values education, which we all know this, is not taught by textbooks, not taught by rote in the classroom, but it's taught by example, by the teachers, by our society's leaders. And of course, it's taught by community. And that's the reason why Cabriba maximizes the immersion of the children in the community. They don't spend as much time, by the way, in the classrooms, not the 6 hours per day for 5 days. I think 2 days of the week, they are out of the classrooms and out in the community. So this is just a little sampling of how different Cabriba does things. So really, again, this sort of, I think, synthesizes what has been said by everybody. And finally, I would just like to leave you with something not exactly directly related to education, but something that, frankly, I always end all of my talks with for the last so many years already. And this is the observation as an economist, that the statistics tell us that 1 out of every 4 Filipinos or 27% now, so it's a little more than 1 out of 4, is poor. However, you turn this around, it means 3 out of 4 Filipino families are not poor. And we only need 1 out of those 3 who are not poor to adopt 1 poor family and help nurture them sustainably out of poverty. Again, what was said earlier, teach them to fish, not just give them a fish. And if you do that, it's so easy. You think about it. Isa lang to sa tatlo na kaya namang mag-share. Mag-share lang sustainably to a poor family, and we can wipe out poverty. This frame used to end there until I started getting people questioning in the open forum. SWS says it's 1 out of 2. Ebon Data Bank says it's 9 out of 10 who are poor. So how can that work? Well, this is where I tell them an anecdote, and it should be Pilar telling you this because I was absent from that Bible sharing. But in a Bible sharing with some squatter families, mostly mothers, and I was absent too, mea culpa, along with the other fathers, so they were mostly mothers. One of the women was sharing about one particular incident one night when she was about to eat their very humble meal of a bowl of rice with some salt with her 5 children, and they heard plaintive cries next door. And you know how it is, very thin walls in squatter communities. Dinig na dinig nila, nag-iiyakan yung mga bata, Nay, gutom na kami. Kailan ba tayo kakain? And narinig daw nung ina, yun na sharing niya sa the Bible sharing. And then what the woman said, overheard by this neighbor, pasensya na kayo mga anak, walang-wala tayo ngayon. Tiisin nyo na lang ang gutom nyo. So this lady who was sharing the Bible session was saying, I could not but go next door. Dinala niya yung kanilang 1 bowl of rice na may asin and shared half of that bowl of rice with another family. Such a meager meal they were about to enjoy. And so, of course, when this story was told, everybody in the Bible sharing session was in tears. And when Pilar in turn told that to me later, I was in tears myself and realized, if the poor can share, if they care enough to share, tayo pa na mas maginhawa ang kabuhayan natin, how can we afford not to share? And that's why we can declare no one is so poor as to have nothing to share. And indeed, no one is so rich not to need something from his or her fellow man. And so I say, with enough caring and sharing, and we've heard this theme earlier as well, poverty need not be inevitable. In spite of what the scripture tells us, that the poor will always be with us, I think we can vanquish poverty if we only care and share enough. Why not? Thank you very much.
Okay, are there any questions for Ms. Pilar and Mr. Ciel Habito? Okay, everyone's hungry. Thank you very much, ma'am. Sir, thank you very much. All right, mga kaibigan, that's the end of Why Not 5. We hope that you enjoyed our 5th installment of Why Not. We hope that you'll be here for the next one. A lot of challenges have been posed, but palagay ko naman I think one of the resounding themes that have been there since the first speaker is that you just have to be courageous enough to do the first step. And if we want big changes in this country, it has to start somewhere, and better start with all of us, especially you who are educators, administrators, principals, and teachers. Our speakers are very accessible. If you need to talk to them, find out more about their own experience, please go ahead. They're still here, and if you can't find them there, we'll give you their email addresses so you can email them and find out about their experience. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat, and good night to all of you. Yes.
Guys, indulge me. Isang gano'n naman. Yes. Basta ikaw, Kim. Correct.
Parang laban. Ay, isa natin 5. So, marami
Five.
Maingay naman yan sa akin.
Oo.